The empire on which the sun never sets. The motto appropriated by the British, and at one point it really was true, arguably having one of the best navies, communication networks, and governing complexes the world has ever and will ever see. And love them, hate them, begrudgingly admire them, the British have left their mark on every region of the globe in one way or another, even if today it seems that their colonial legacies vanished in only a matter of decades. Now, this isn't a video over how various revolutions, wars, protests, and referendums slowly and then quickly chipped away at their once mighty empire, as the British Empire technically never truly died off, as remnants exist on and in between every continent, varying greatly by size, population, and prominence, although admittedly all are islands. But needless to say, these islands are quite interesting nonetheless, officially classified as British Overseas Territories by the government, and the constituents as well as the mainland British populace seem satisfied with the arrangement, although every territory is historically, demographically, and culturally distinct, as we will discuss in today's video. To start, the British did attempt to conquer many areas of Europe with various degrees of success, even taking the entirety of Cyprus and Malta for a time, being incredibly important during World War II and in other endeavors in the 20th century, before both voting for independence. And there's quite a large Cypriot and Maltese diaspora in the UK and other Anglosphere countries, comparatively speaking. However, the UK never fully relinquished their control on Cyprus, as two small territories known as Akrotiri and Dhekelia remain on the island, both military outposts from a prior agreement with the Cypriot government since 1960, and have remained a British territory even since the chaos that has befallen the island since independence. The population remains at around 15,000, split roughly evenly between native Greek Cypriots and members of the British military and their families, with both territories combined making up around 1% of the island's population. This brings us to the most controversial remaining British territory of Gibraltar, also located in the Mediterranean, but with a much deeper history than the Cypriot air bases. Gibraltar was and is an incredibly important outpost, being a small peninsula located off the southern coast of Iberia, yet because of its placement oversees much of the trade going to and from the Mediterranean through the straits on boats, and was captured by the British in the early 1700s from Spain, and has remained a British territory ever since, although the Spanish also claimed sovereignty over the small peninsula of 33,000 people, souring the modern relations between two otherwise quite cordial nations. Although you also have the Spanish North African territories of Ceuta and Melilla, also claimed by Morocco, so I guess no one's ever completely happy. The original people of Gibraltar before the British conquest were undoubtedly Castilian, although following centuries of incorporation and rule, many others have come to make this rock their home, mostly from the rest of the British Empire, although including Italians, Portuguese, Maltese, Sephardi Jews, and even Irish and other Celts from the periphery of the home nations, and over the generations these distinct groups have fused into a single ethnic identity. Gibraltarians are a unique hybrid of all these British and Southern European groups, along with more recent migrants from India and Morocco, and the local dialect of Spanish has evolved into Llanito, a distinct language combining many Mediterranean languages with British English. Another unique wartime British territory are the Channel Islands, a collection divided between the bailiwicks of Jersey and Guernsey, which you may think are the remnants of some old Anglo-French conflict such as the 100 Years' War, but they're actually the result of the Norman conquest of England, as once the English took control, they inherited sovereignty over this small collection of islands off the coast of France, which have a mostly ethnic Norman population. The islands, which together contain around 160,000 people, are technically not a part of England or the United Kingdom, yet are still a crown dependency, meaning for all intents and purposes are controlled by the British government, as they have been for hundreds of years now, despite frequent attempted incursions by the French throughout history and the Germans during World War II, being some of the only British soil occupied by Nazi Germany. The native people of the Channel Islands are ethnically most similar to others along the Norman coast of France, although in the past century many have lost their original Norman tongue in favor of English following more recent migration from the mainland of England, although the people are still genetically and in many ways culturally more similar to their kin in Normandy. Less than 5% of the population speaks one of the Norman dialects as a first language, very similar to the situation of the Celtic languages of the UK. And in the past few decades, there has been quite a large migration from other areas of Europe, principally the two Poes, Portugal and Poland, creating two unique island nations and cultures. Outside of Europe, the oldest British colony still in existence is the mid-Atlantic island territory of Bermuda, the northernmost point of the more well-known Bermuda Triangle, with the first known discovery being by the Spanish sailor Juan de Bermudez in 1505, who claimed the barren island for Spain, although after a century of no settlements whatsoever, English colonists claimed the island for their own. Soon enough, Englishmen, as well as small numbers of the Irish, began to settle on this small 21-square-mile island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, being an important supply center for British ships traversing the northern Atlantic. African slaves, as well as former slaves from the Spanish Caribbean, soon began to come to the islands as well, and after a few generations, the majority of the population was of non-English ancestry, greatly disturbing colonial officials, leading to a policy of segregation, meaning all products of interracial marriage were barred from marrying into the white community, and as a result, the so-called black population had heavy Irish, Portuguese, and other European admixture. Today, the island is split between blacks, whites, and multiracials at around 54, 31, and 8% respectively, although a large chunk of the native black Bermudans are old stock mulattoes, and there has been a large degree of migration from the mainland UK, Canada, US, others in the former British West Indies, and various Asian countries, creating quite the interesting society. Because of this, Bermuda is sometimes considered to be part of the British West Indies, despite its distance from any of the Caribbean islands, many of which remain British territories, including the British Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos, Anguilla, Montserrat, and the Cayman Islands, with all, with the exception of the Cayman Islands, being most similar to Jamaica and other Caribbean islands demographically, having a black majority with white, mulatto, Asian, and Latino minorities. It's worth noting that the black Caribbean population of these islands do have varying degrees of European, especially Irish, and Amerindian admixture, very similar to blacks in the United States, with percentages varying greatly by island. The Cayman Islands have gained quite a bit of notoriety in the past few decades due to their economic position as a tax haven for American, Canadian, and British businessmen, and hence has one of the largest expatriate populations of any territory, roughly 70%, and this creates a unique demographic situation where the population is split between those of African, European, Asian, and mixed-race ancestry due to the diverse assortment of ethnic groups and nationalities the Caymanians are descended from. These are not the last British remnant colonies in the Americas, however, as one of the more contentious is that of the Falklands off the coast of South America, which also has a long and convoluted history, initially discovered and claimed by the Spanish, but with the British later settling the islands in the late 18th century, and the Spanish population was later evacuated following the British invasion of Rio de la Plata, leaving mostly settlers of Welsh, Scottish, and English descent. The islands have since been an integral part of the British Empire, although the Spanish successor Argentina has frequently feuded for control over the islands, Las Malvinas as they are known to them, and the natives of the islands are of Celtic, English, Native American, and Latino ancestry from other migrants. Outside of the capital, Stanley, which is mostly made up of newer, more transient arrivals from overseas, the bulk of the population is descended from the old families and original settlers, despite a large influx from Chile, the UK, and St. Helena, a British territory not too far away in the South Atlantic. St. Helena, again, although discovered by the Portuguese, was eventually settled by the British, along with the dependencies of Ascension Island and Tristan da Cunha, a string of islands, yet not yet an archipelago, located in between Africa and South America. These islands served many purposes throughout the existence of the empire, originally a penal colony, most famously the island prison of Napoleon Bonaparte after his defeat to the English, as well as the prison for many Zulu and Afrikaner rebels in Cape Colony, many of whom settled there for good. St. Helena was also an important outpost in the British War on global slavery, intercepting many hundreds of ships carrying slaves from the West and Central African coast bound for Latin America, with many freed slaves arriving on their shores, sharing the islands with English and Celtic colonists since the 17th century. The vast majority of the 5,000 Saint Helenians or saints today, at least those whose families have been on the island for generations, are multiracial, a Creole identity formed from many waves of migration to this curious collection of islands located in the middle of the ocean, speaking a highly unique dialect of English not seen anywhere else on Earth, with aspects of British, South African, American, and Australian dialects. Because of this, saints have one of the most unique and diverse phenotypes I've ever seen, perhaps most reminiscent of the Cape Coloreds of southern Africa, and interestingly, unlike on St. Helena, genetic studies have been conducted on the smaller island of Tristan da Cunha, finding that the paternal lineages are of British, Dutch, and Italian origin, while the maternal lineages are of African and Asian origin. If I had to hazard a guess on what the gene pool of these islands looks like, just to get a grasp on the history of migration to the islands, I'd say they're roughly 40 to 60% European, 30 to 40% African, and 10 to 20% Asian. And this is my personal estimation based on observation, not studies, although these islands are increasingly grabbing the world's attention due to their unique location, history, and isolation. Lastly are the Pitcairn Islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, originally settled by a hodgepodge of Brits who called the islands home in the mid-18th century when a group of 9 sailors mutinied, taking along a few Tahitian brides from nearby and living isolated in the middle of the ocean for generations. Most interesting, however, is the mass exodus of many Pitcairners to the island of Norfolk in between Australia and New Zealand, now a territory of Australia, with their descendants numbering in the thousands, although only around 50 Euronesians remain on the island of Pitcairn today. Clearly, although these are the only remnants of the British Empire, numbering only a few 100,000 compared to the quarter of the planet at the Empire's height, they undoubtedly have some of the more fascinating stories to tell. So let me know your thoughts on the last of the British colonies, and for today's poll, tell me which group of British territories you would like to learn more about. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone. This has been Mason, and I'll see you next time.